Hello and welcome to this presentation about different types of groove, in which I'm going to show how the strategies of musicians change how we experience groove. My name is Toni Bechtold. I'm a PhD student at the University of Birmingham. I also work as a researcher in Lucerne and as a jazz musician. In the last decade, the field of groove research emerged at the crossroads of various music-related disciplines. In music psychology, an understanding of groove by Yanata and colleagues became almost canonical. The groove is that aspect of the music that induces a pleasant sense of wanting to move along with the music. This understanding has two components that are related as cause and effect: the music or musical structure, and what groove researchers called the groove experience, the feeling of being in groove. Several studies have investigated empirically which characteristics of the musical structure are important for eliciting such a groove experience. But how does a groove experience actually feel for a listener or musicians? Is the feel and experience the same for all kinds of music, or does it vary in some way besides in intensity? If this would be the case, one can hypothesize that the musical formula for the groove experience has to change to create different feelings or shades of the groove experience. Therefore, the main questions for this present study are how a groove experience feels, whether there are different groove experiences, and how musical structures are constituted in theory and practice in order to achieve different groove experiences. In order to answer these questions, we chose the qualitative approach of expert interviews. This approach highlights the views, intentions, and strategies of music creators and allows to gather detailed qualitative data, including the interpretations by the experts themselves. This data is subsequently analyzed, compared, and interpreted by the researchers to build a theory grounded in expert knowledge. We expect relating and comparing this theory to the established groove literature to have several benefits. It can support and broaden the theoretical framework in which groove research takes place, provide explanations for experimental results, and it can uncover aspects of groove that were previously neglected and thus inspire further experiments. We need to mention here that we originally designed the interviews to investigate the relationship between musical groove and catchiness. As part of that, the experts described how they understand groove and how it comes about in practice, which led to the results that are presented here today. We followed methodological guidelines by Bogner and colleagues to design semi-structured interviews of approximately 1.5 hours each. Additionally, we chose 6 short musical clips from different musical styles to substantiate the discussion beyond general questions on the topic. These stimuli functioned as clues to elicit knowledge that might have not been uttered otherwise. The experts further used the stimuli as concrete examples to illustrate or juxtapose their views, a function that is called microcosms. We also chose 2 clips which would likely not induce groove at all. These were provocations intended to motivate the experts to explain why there is no groove. Each expert also supplied a short clip to demonstrate their views. After the transcription process, we analyzed the interviews in a 4-step procedure as proposed by Bogner et al. First, all relevant statements were coded inductively. The second step, we grouped thematically corresponding statements together over all interviews and compared their content. This led to third, the conceptualization, in which the point of view of the analysis changed from expert statements to the interpretations by the researcher. Although it has to be said that in this case, several experts already provided well thought out concepts as a basis. And lastly, there's the construction of a general theory. Before we get to the results, who were the experts in this study? Some criteria were established beforehand. They should have 3 types of knowledge: technical knowledge of how to play, compose, and produce, processual knowledge of how things are done in practice in the mainstream music industry or in their respective field, and thirdly, they should have interpretative knowledge to put their work and intentions into perspective. Additionally, they should have a high reputation among musicians, which was ensured by asking around 30 professional musicians for recommendations. A goal was to have a somewhat diverse sample of experts in terms of musical style, age, gender, and main instrument. In the end, we conducted 5 interviews with experts that varied in age, main instrument, and main popular music style. The analysis of the interviews resulted in a rather complicated 3-step model. As part of this presentation, I can only present a short categorical overview to illustrate the impact a different type of groove has. First, to the groove experience itself. Groove is understood as a primary mean of communication between musicians and listeners, having necessary emotional and bodily components. Various reactions in the listener are intended and deemed necessary for eliciting groove experiences. Music should grab the listener's attention and foster their interest. The listener should be able to follow and understand the music, either emotionally, physically, or intellectually. The music should further invite participation and create a feeling of community. Lastly, the music needs to evoke some kind of affect in the listener. There is a variety of strategies that lead to these reactions in the groove experience. Many are compositional strategies, such as a clear basic idea behind a song or the creation of several interacting layers. Furthermore, compositional elements are balanced according to scales, such as complexity and simplicity. The experts frequently stress the importance of the performance and the nuances that result from it, and of the appropriate sound design for the music. What became evident very clearly, however, is that all this is understood as being very relative. For many of these categories, reactions of the individual listener or player differ. For example, what moves me personally on an emotional level might leave the next person indifferent. The experts therefore talked frequently about optimizing the music for their target group, which can also be just the experts themselves. The influence of the individual listener on the groove experience has also been shown in experience previously, for example by our team in Lucerne. A second, similarly important moderator emerged in these interviews: the type of intended groove experience, or in short, the type of groove. The strategies, reactions, and also the groove experience itself vary depending on the intended type of groove. How exactly music is played, composed, and constructed leads to different feelings and movements. Therefore, the type of groove influences musical and emotional aspects of groove. Similar theories can already be found in musicological literature. Anne Danielsen, for example, stated that the state of being offered by a funk groove is different from that of, for example, country and western. And in this process, musical features and cultural aspects work together. Yet, music psychological investigations of groove tend to bypass these differences. So, what exactly changes with different groove types? I would like to exemplify this with two of the stimuli that are used in the interviews and their assessments by the experts. I focus on the differences, which is why the groove experience is reduced to its bodily part, divided into the bodily sensation and the associated movement. First, the meters Zizzy Strut, which the experts identified as a New Orleans funk. They said the music is played with a somewhat paradox, loose but focused feel, which makes every beat feel extended. The four patterns are tightly interwoven and often employ hockets. All patterns have relatively high syncopation and the sound of the instruments is very crispy. They describe the bodily sensations that it creates as a simultaneous push and pull, as sticky in a positive sense or as rubber-like. The associated movement is a filigree dance in which the limbs move independently. Second, Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water, described as a classic rock or rock hymn. Here, the experts described the performance as very steady and like a train that cannot stop. The patterns are not interwoven but have clear roles instead: melody, pulse, and timekeeper. The syncopation is rather low and the sounds of the instruments are strong and powerful, which is augmented by the use of distortion. The bodily sensations are pulsation, force, vigor, or drive. In terms of movement, the experts talked about raising their fist and stomping, or headbanging. The experts were sure that these differences in strategies and effect were completely intended and also causally related. So, groove differs in many aspects for these two, and also for the other stimuli used in the study. But what are the groove types? How can they be described or classified? Describing them in terms of musical structure, genre, or movement seems suboptimal. One would have to be very, very specific to name the structures, performances, and subtleties. This would reach hundreds of categories without coming close to comprehensiveness. Hence, I propose to understand and classify groove types on the basis of their associated bodily sensations. The list of types is still long, as more than 30 bodily sensations and metaphors thereof came up in just these 5 interviews. Yet this approach concentrates on how a groove feels, and the description is independent from musical knowledge, structure, or cultural aspects. This study has 2 main implications on the field of groove research. The result that a different groove type means changes in musical and emotional aspects of the groove can broaden the theoretical framework in which groove research is conducted. There are different types of groove, which means that any strategies for groove and the resulting musical properties are relative. To include this relativity in the concept, it might be more appropriate to speak of groove experiences instead of the groove experience. The study supports the definition of the groove experience as pleasurable urge to move, but it suggests seeing it as a requirement instead of a description. It seems to be a common ground for groove experiences, yet, as I have tried to show, it is not a sufficient description of the groove experience itself. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can also contact me per email to talk about this or other research later on.